Hello and welcome to our December 6th CySA Plus study session. I am Arami and I will be hosting the session. If you want to join us at our Discord, our link is here. And if you would like to watch on twitch.tv, this is the link I stream to when we have our live sessions. After the session, we will also upload to YouTube, so if you're watching this on YouTube and you want to join in and be able to discuss questions as we're going over them, please join the Discord. And we do these sessions probably 3 times a week, but only one is recorded and uploaded to YouTube. All right, so let's look at question number 1. You view threat feeds daily online for free from many sources and try to keep up to date on what is happening in the cybersecurity industry. What kind of source are these threat feeds? Are they open source, proprietary, zero-day, or closed source? You view threat feeds daily, online, and for free from many different sources and try to keep up to date on what is happening in the cybersecurity industry. What type of source does this describe? Is this open source, proprietary, zero-day, or closed source? If you said open source, you are right. Open source refers to the fact that the information does not cost the end user anything to use. Open source can refer to a threat feed, code, programs, or any number of other things. Um, Proprietary and closed source are the same thing, where you would be expected to pay money probably to either view that threat feed or use the data or something of that nature behind a paywall. Be careful when choosing a proprietary source, as some just scrape multiple open source platforms and repackage the data that you already have freely available from other sources. A zero-day is a type of an attack that exploits a vulnerability that has been completely unknown up until this point. 0 days are usually impossible to predict or prevent, and the only line of defense is somehow noticing odd behavior and stopping it in its tracks, but most of the time it is too late. You would have to be in the right place at the right time and watching. So it's highly unlikely that you will notice a 0 day while it is happening. Question number 2. You came into work this morning and found the company's website, www.petrochemoilandgas.com, has been defaced with images of animals covered in oil and a slogan of Save the Environment. What kind of attacker most likely performed this attack? Is that a nation state? Is it organized crime? Is it a hacktivist or an APT? You came into work this morning and found that the company's website has been defaced with images of animals covered in oil and a slogan of Save the Environment. What kind of attacker is most likely performing this attack? Is that a nation state, organized crime, hacktivist, or APT? If you said hacktivist, you are correct. Our main things that we would choose out of this question to answer this, that we have a website that has been defaced and there's a slogan also involved, that pretty much points to hacktivist. A hacktivist is usually trying to change how an entity works to align with some worldview. In this case, the hacktivist believes that the company is hurting the environment and needs to clean its act up. A nation state is usually associated with an advanced persistent threat, or APT, because it usually costs a great amount of money to find and exploit vulnerabilities and stay hidden from cybersecurity analysts. These are the people who normally make your 0 days. Organized crime is usually out after a payment of some kind. They're not changing how a business does its day-to-day stuff. These people would be more likely to use ransomware, so WannaCry or something along those lines. Social engineering. Hey, here's a invoice that you didn't pay. You need to pay it. It's over 90 days due. We're letting you slide with this late fee, but if you don't pay it immediately, you're going to get slapped with a $50 late fee. Or other methods to make a quick profit. Question 3. The Bank of Uzbekistan has been hacked, and our CSIRT has determined that an old computer was vulnerable to MS-17-010, which is also known as Eternal Blue. And this computer was also exposed to the external network. Since many banks use similar hardware and software, they share threat data with other banks. What stage of the intelligence cycle is the bank currently in? Is this requirements, dissemination, feedback, or analysis? The Bank of Uzbekistan has been hacked, and their CSIRT has determined that an old computer was vulnerable to MS-17-010, and that this computer was also exposed to the external network. Since many banks use similar hardware and software, they share threat data with other banks. What stage of the intelligence cycle is the bank currently in? Would this be requirements, dissemination, feedback, or analysis? If you said dissemination, you're absolutely correct. Dissemination is the process of sharing data after an attack. This is usually from a provider to end users. So it would be like Microsoft to anyone running a Windows OS. In this case, the vulnerability was our own team, and we didn't foresee someone gaining access to an old computer on a network, so there's no provider in this current situation. But legacy equipment and software exists all over the place, and you may stumble across it at some point. Keep in mind that these systems are usually more susceptible to attack than a newer system with all the updates. Analysis is when we are determining who, what, where, when, why, and how a compromise has occurred. In this case, we already have that data, and now we need to share it with other banks. It's not always possible to figure out who, and it's not really a very large, important thing. We need to understand what they've done and how to correct it. Who did it is almost negligible. It's very unlikely that you can even track these people down. Most people performing these attacks are going to use proxies. They're going to use VPNs. They're going to mask their tracks. Maybe they're going to go through Tor. It's going to be a lot more work figuring out who it is, and even then, if you find that they're in some country that has a non-extradition treaty with your country, you can't do anything even though you know who it is. Feedback is performed when we send data from end users, like HP or Dell or someone, back to the provider like Microsoft. If I sent a email to Microsoft saying, hey, I'm having trouble, they might try to help me, but they wouldn't really listen and make a KB article, right? I'm just one user. Again, there's no provider, so we are not sending feedback in this situation. Requirements help define the questions that intelligence is expected to make a contribution to answering. They can also help by specifying what types of intelligence or artifacts we should focus on, such as logs, cookies, IOCs. Question 4. You're going over to web server logs during a pen test and you've found the following entry. What is this and who performed it? Is this white team, blue team, red team, SQL injection, cross-site scripting, or SSRF? You are going over to web server logs during a pen test and you found the following entry. What is this and who performed it? Is that the white team, the red team, the blue team? Is it SQL injection, cross-site scripting, or SSRF? If you said it's the red team and it is cross-site scripting, you are correct. In a pen test, there are 4 teams. There's the red team, who are the attackers, the blue team, who are the defenders, the purple team, who kind of plays both sides and helps out, and the white team, which oversees the exercise and makes rulings based on whether something can be done or not. SQL injection's telltale sign would be using SQL commands to interact with the database, and we don't see this here, so we can easily rule this out. Server-side request forgery is normally done in the URL by playing with the inputs, and we can get the website to load pages that it shouldn't be loading for us. So we might use some directory transversal for SSRF. We might say, oh, I can't go to private folder, but if I go private something else and then go up a level, I'm in private folder. Oh, look, that worked. So this is clearly cross-site scripting, where we would normally type this text into a box, or maybe edit the web page's code in Inspector, and this would be in the maybe username, password, email, or if it was an e-commerce site, it could be in the review section of the site. You are reviewing more logs on the web server during the same pen test. You find the entry union all select group underscore concat column name in parentheses comma null comma null comma null comma null from information underscore schema dot columns where table underscore name equals people in double quotes. What kind of attack is being performed and what data is this command attempting to find? Is this an SQL injection, a directory transversal, a buffer overflow? Are we looking for the names of all the people? Are we looking for the names of all the columns? Or are we looking for the name of the database? We are reviewing more logs from the web server during that same pen test, and we find the following entry. What kind of attack is being performed and what data is this command attempting to find? Is this SQL injection, directory transversal, buffer overflow, names of all the people, names of all the columns, or the name of the database? What are we looking for on those? If you said SQL injection and oh, what was the other thing I was asking? If you said SQL injection and that we were searching for the names of all the columns, you're right. So what we have here is a union, which is basically bridging in that database so we can select. This is like an and almost. So if we had part of an entry in the SQL query and we put a union in there, then it would also perform this query. So we're doing select group concat column names, which would give us the column names in a comma separated format when we display this. And we are getting those column names from the table people. Alrighty. The reason we would want to do this is because in SQL, I can't say, hey SQL, give me the fifth word or the fifth value from the third column. SQL says, I don't know what the third column is. Can you give me a little bit more information? I need the name of the column. I don't know what column 3 means. So in this case, we would have to use the name of the column. And this statement, this SQL statement here, helps with enumeration and figuring out what column names there are in that database table so we can figure out what other things we can do to get more data out of this system. This is not a directory traversal or a buffer overflow, since we are not doing anything regarding directories or memory allocation or extra long entries into a I want to say into an entry box, but really any input box could work, or command line or anything like that. Question number 6. 8-bit Oni is at the temple using his cell phone as a hotspot, and that's kind of spotty. He doesn't have access to the temple's Wi-Fi. What tool could he use to crack the Wi-Fi and get a better signal so he doesn't sound like Dax going through a dead spot? Would that be Zap, Burp Suite, Aircrack NG, John the Ripper, or PACU? 8-bit Oni is at the temple using his cell phone as a hotspot, which is spotty. He doesn't have access to the temple's Wi-Fi. What tool could he use to crack the Wi-Fi and get a better signal so he doesn't sound like Dax going through a dead spot? Would we use Zap, Burp Suite, Aircrack NG, John the Ripper, or PACU? If you said Aircrack NG, you would be correct. This is the only wireless cracking tool that is listed in these options. It can capture handshakes and authorization packets to eventually work out what the Wi-Fi password is. If Oni wants a better connection, he should fire up Aircrack next time he's at the temple and start sniffing packets. One thing he shouldn't do is deauth connections. Once you start deauthing connections, that's technically illegal because you're interfering with someone else's connection. So you can sniff packets all day. It's not illegal. It's being sent through the air. Anyone can see it. It is what it is. But if you deauth another computer or another connection and make it constantly re-authenticate, that is highly illegal. Z-Attack Proxy, or ZAP, and Burp Suite are both proxies which are great at attacking websites, but they do nothing to help with gaining access to a password-protected Wi-Fi. John the Ripper is used to crack passwords on a computer, and we feed the program with a file with password hashes to attack. PACU is an open-source AWS exploitation framework. It would be great in attacking cloud infrastructure, but not so great at cracking Wi-Fi passwords. If I'm, question number 7. If I'm using John the Ripper to crack a Linux password file, what files do I need from the target OS to perform the attack? Would that be the SAM file, the NTLM hash file, the shadow file, the password file, or the passwd file? If I'm using John the Ripper to crack a Linux password file, what files do I need from the target OS to perform the attack? Would that be the SAM file, the NTLM hash file, the shadow file, the password file, or the passwd file? If you said the shadow file and the passwd file, you would be correct. These files can both be found in the etc folder. We would also need to run unshadow, which is part of John the Ripper. It is there, but you have to unshadow that file before you begin cracking the passwords, or your attempts are going to fail. The SAM and NTLM hash files are from Windows systems, and they would be valid targets for John if we were attacking a Microsoft Windows-based OS. It is useful to note, NTLM, you would have to specify that it's NTLM and not just NT. If I believe John defaults to NT, so yeah, if you had an NTLM hash file you were trying to crack, you would need to specify that it is NTLM. Password file itself isn't a thing other than hoping to catch you off guard, thinking, oh, it's the password file, I know this. Yeah, it's the passwd, not password spelled out. All right, question number 8. Match the following descriptions with the correct validation. Are they false positives, true positives, false negatives, true negatives, or exceptions? So we've performed a vulnerability scan. An internal system has a vulnerability that has been determined to not be remediated by upper management. We have a system on your network that has not been patched to prevent MS17010, and you verify the patch is not installed. You have a vulnerability scan that shows there is a blind SQL injection vulnerability in the website, but you've been told by the devs and a third party that it doesn't exist. We have a vulnerability scan that shows that your system is not vulnerable to SM Bleed, which is CVE 2020-1206. But you know for a fact your company has not approved the patch for this vulnerability to be installed on company machines yet. So which of these would be an exception, which would be a false positive, which would be a true positive, what would be a false negative, or what would be a true negative? One option will not be used. Let's go over them. An internal system has a vulnerability that has been determined to not be remediated by your superiors and upper management. This would be marked as an exception. Sometimes the cost or technical requirements of remediating a vulnerability is higher than letting it remain and just dealing with it if it is exploited. In this case, you'd mark it as an exception and move on. If you mark it as an exception in your scanner, it won't show up as a vulnerability in future scans. We would not mark it as a false positive because that vulnerability does exist. It's just we aren't going to deal with it. Our scan shows that the system on your network has not been patched to prevent MS17010, and you verify that the patch is not installed on the system. This would be a true positive. The vulnerability scan shows a vulnerability, and we also can prove that that vulnerability does exist in the system. We have a vulnerability scan that shows that there's a blind SQL injection vulnerability in the website, but you've been told by the devs and a third party that it doesn't exist. This would be a false positive. Blind attacks are actually very hard to determine with a scanner, and they often produce false positives. The reason they are hard to detect with a scanner is the scanner says, oh, the code executed, it must have worked. Blind attacks normally do not have any feedback, like in the immediate form. So normally if we were cracking a password, all of a sudden we'd get a 200 OK and we could move on into the website. But in this case, we throw some code, and if it doesn't error, that scanner's probably going to say, oh, no error, must have worked. Doesn't always work that way. Most of these are going to be false positives. And the fact that we said that the developers and the third party, which would probably be a pen test party or another SOC or something, then they say, no, that doesn't work. We can definitely say that this is a false positive. Your system is not vulnerable to SM Bleed CVE 2020-1206, but you know for a fact that your company has not approved the patch for this vulnerability. This would be a false negative. We are aware of the vulnerability, and we're waiting on change management to approve the patch for SM Bleed, but they haven't done it yet. So we know for a fact that we are vulnerable, but the scanner does not show that we are vulnerable. Maybe the scanner is out of date. Maybe it needs updating, or maybe our threat feeds aren't accurate, or something else is going on. But this is definitely a false negative. Moving on to question 9. Your company's scanning procedure is to scan each device fully at least once every day, but not all devices are equal. Which of the following are problems that we could run into while using non-privileged network-based scanning? Would that be lost, dropped, or late packets, high CPU and RAM usage on user workstations, false negative results, false positive results, or all the above? Your company's scanning procedure is to scan each device fully at least once every day, but not all devices are created equal. Which of the following are problems we could run into while using non-privileged network-based scanning? Would that be lost, dropped, or late packets? Would it be high CPU and RAM usage on the user workstations? Would it be false negative results? Or would it be false positive results? Or do you feel like all the above, all of this could happen from a non-privileged network-based scan? If you said network congestion with lost, dropped, or late packets, false negatives and false positives, these are all possible when using non-privileged network-based scanning. Having high CPU usage and RAM usage would not be something that this would cause. It is possible that because we don't have a deep view into the endpoint systems like we would with agent-based scan, that we may be unable to verify that an attack worked or that one has failed. Or that an attack would work or that one would fail. Since we are scanning from a device on the network to all the endpoints on the network, we're going to generate a lot of traffic. If the network is poorly designed, we might see jitter on VoIP calls or very slow loading times onto workstations while browsing the web or using shared resources on the network. We could partially mitigate this by running the scans at night, but this may interfere with backups that are being performed if they are scheduled at night as well. And for our final question of the day, question 10. You have used Nmap to scan a system on the network. Your output here is as follows. Who is the manufacturer of this piece of equipment? What OS is it running? And what is the likely purpose of this machine? So let's take a look at this scan here. We have port 80, which says HTTP. Could that be a web service? Maybe. Can't really say. I'm not sure. I just know 80 is open. I see 139 and 445 are open. Both of these open usually means that it's a Windows system. 2179 is Hyper-V RDP service, so maybe we're running some sort of a virtualization server. 3389 is the default port for Windows RDP. It says MSWBT server, but we can never assume that the service that is provided in the Nmap output is 100% correct. Nmap makes its best guess, but we can never say that it's 100% accurate. We can say that according to the MAC address, that this piece of equipment is purchased or made by Hewlett Packard. Now the NIC card is an HP card. The computer may not be an HP product, but this is our best guess right now. For these ports here, no conclusion can really be made. There's nothing registered to run on these ports by default. So, in summary, the manufacturer is probably HP. We're probably running Windows. I got Microsoft here. I got Microsoft here. Yeah, I would probably say Windows, right? And MSRPC here, remote procedure calls. What's the likely purpose? I could say it might be a virtualization server, or it could possibly be hosting a website on HTTP. If I were to look at this in a real world environment, I would probably want to see if I'm actually running something on HTTP, and if not, I would want to close this port because 80 is an insecure port. Well, that does it for today's 10 questions. I hope you join us next week on Wednesday. That would be the 14th for our next live session and video recording. Thanks. Please like, subscribe. I know it's kind of annoying when everyone says it, but it would really help the channel and get me more viewers, which would be cool. All right, have a good weekend, guys.